Meeting. I take John, you can hear me? Okay, okay. I'm joined by my colleague, Ronnie White, Councilor White. Uh, uh, Chief Mons, you have your item?
Yes, sir, Councilor Majak. Hello, everybody. Um, the Department of Fire is seeking legislation to amend an ordinance that was passed previously to enter into an agreement to accept reimbursement grants for funding from Onondaga County for up to $18,000. The grant is for reimbursement of payroll, backfill, and overtime for sending our staff to hazmat training courses offered by FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security. So we're just looking to amend the old legislation to accept an additional sum of money, which is $18,000, up to $18,000. Does anybody have any questions?
So the grant is through the county, and we participated, and now we bill them for the time that we put in, and we're just seeking reimbursement for that time.
Yes, and they're giving us additional cash to pay for more training, more backfill, and overtime to
Okay.
conduct the training. Yes.
Okay. Councilor White, do you have any questions?
No, I explained that quite well, so I have no additional questions.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Good. Good. I take we are moving it to the agenda. Councilor White, you all right with it?
Yes, I'm okay with that.
All right. All right. All right. Thank you, Chief Mont.
Thank you, Councilor White. Thank you, Councilor Majak.
Yep. Anything else for you, or is that all?
No, that's it at this time. Thank you,
Okay.
Councilor Majak.
All right. All right. So we have an item that we held in our last council voting session. So, we just want to talk about it today. It's a downtown committee item. I'm joined here today. We are joined here today by downtown committee executive director. Is that correct, America? That's the title, right? Executive director, right?
That's correct.
Just want to make sure I didn't butcher that one. So she's with us, and we have some questions for her, but I would like Chief Cecil to just run an overview of what the item is, and we'll go, get going with it. Chief Cecil?
Sure. Thanks, Councilor. Hello, everybody. So the item is to enter into an agreement with the Downtown Committee for 50% payment of that Armory Square detail, $104,300, I believe it is. And the city would pay the exact same amount to field the Armory Square detail, which in the past has been 8 officers and 2 sergeants on Friday and Saturday night from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., 3 in the morning. And so in the past, the city has incurred the entire cost. This time around, requesting to enter into an agreement with the Downtown Committee so they can pay for 50% of that detail. I did want to make something clear. I'm glad it's on the agenda again today. Is I talked to the Chief Buckner and Deputy Chief Trudell, just to make it clear on the numbers. Even though we have in the past gone with 8 and 2, things have changed drastically in our world, and I know the restrictions from the governor go away on May 31st. So that one weekend may very well be a big one for us. We will probably start with 8 officers and 2 sergeants to gauge what's going on down there. But we will gauge things by weather, whether it's a holiday, whether we're seeing activity down there, and we may very well adjust. I won't say very well, we will adjust depending on what we're seeing down there. So because things have changed so drastically, we may not always go with 8 and 2 as we have in the past. We may go with 6 and 1. We may go with 3. Depending on what's going on down there, we may not have to use the numbers of officers and sergeants that we've had in the past, is my point. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, thank you, Chief. That's definitely a helpful information. Now, Councilor White, from what Chief just said, before I ask America to just run us through the historical background of this agreement, do you have anything for Chief?
Yeah. So it's my understanding that when staffed, that those positions on that detail are staffed from overtime. Is that correct or fair to say?
That's correct. It is overtime.
Now, is there any particular reason why that has to be an overtime detail? Could that not be a regular duty station?
Sure. To make it so, Councilor, great question. To make it a regular duty would mean that we'd have to pull officers from the 3 to 11 shift because it switches over from shift to shift, 3 to 11 shift. But the bulk of them would come from the midnight shift. So on any particular midnight shift, if you have 20, 21, 22, 23 officers, and you
Chief,
suddenly take
I'm
8
sorry, I'm having a
officers.
little trouble hearing you. Could you speak up just a little bit? It's
You
not picking
bet.
up quite
So,
well.
sure. So if we
There
went
you go.
with if we went with a straight time detail and pulled officers from the shift, this detail 11 to 3 obviously covers 2 shifts, but the bulk of them would come from the midnight shift. There are nights where we, on a Friday, Saturday night, have 20, 23 officers for the entire city. So those officers, 8 officers, 6 officers, 2 sergeants, if we were to pull them for this detail, you're talking about a bunch of officers coming out of the neighborhoods, no longer able to take calls, priority calls, and no longer able to do proactive activity in the neighborhoods themselves. It just wouldn't be manageable. That number of officers pulled from the regular duty would just drain our resources and put calls further behind when they come into 911.
Sure, and I could understand that, but is there a way then to enlarge the number of officers that would be on necessarily, let's say, on that midnight shift then? Right, so instead of pulling them from the detail, you enlarge the shift number to include the officers that would be posted down in Armory Square.
Yeah, Counselor, that is very much speaking to the numbers of officers we have in totality now for the department. I didn't mean to jump ahead of you, Chief. As we can get classes on and increase that number, then that flexibility becomes a reality. The fact that we're talking about a Friday and Saturday, if we were talking about Tuesday and Wednesday, evenings, we might be talking about something different of the flexibility of our officers throughout the city. But when we're talking about Friday and Saturday nights in the heat of the summer, it's a whole nother issue.
I see. Okay. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, then I guess what you're saying is it's not only just a staffing, well, I guess it's a purely staffing issue because there is the ability then to theoretically enlarge the shift, right? That is a possibility, but there's just not enough personnel for that to occur.
Theoretically, if there were more bodies, but right now it's just not enough bodies. So theoretically, we could look at another detail, but Deputy Chief Cecil is absolutely right. We don't want to sacrifice, and I don't mean this like downtown isn't important, but we don't want to sacrifice the responsibility in our neighborhoods for our dedicated to pull people into downtown.
Certainly, and the concern here isn't one of the detail being there. I very much think that detail should be there. I frequent that area during those times often, so I've seen them, be very helpful to the public safety of being in that area. So I'm supportive of it. I'm just a little worried, of the cost, right? And thinking of ways that we could, make this more affordable for the city, which would seem to me to have it be a regular duty station versus overtime. But I understand that seems to be a logistical problem at this time.
You said, Councilor White?
Councilman Majo, to
Yeah.
Councilman White's point about the cost, that is the primary reason that we reached out to Mirica and her folks and working with the mayor to see if we could work out something to go with this being kind of a joint responsibility as far as the finances are concerned. So what we have before us is basically them splitting the cost with us, whereas now we receive nothing. I can tell you that the position is important enough, though, that it's really a basic decision for us. We either have a joint partnership with the Downtown Association helping us pay for it, or the city is 100% eating the cost because not having officers there is not an option.
Okay, is that all for you, Councilor White?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay, so America, run us through here because we have community members here listening as well as other folks like counselors. So what's the history of this contract, and how did you get pulled into this as a nonprofit organization?
So I have been in Syracuse for about 17 years now, working in the downtown area. And so this detail, I believe has been in place for probably 20, 25 years. from what I understand from some of the Armory Square bar owners who have been around for that period of time. So years ago, at least when I came here in the mid 2000s, the detail was paid for by the Bar Association. So this was something where they used to hold a lot of different events in Armory Square. They would close down Walton Street. They would have bands coming in, and then the alcohol sales, generated from that would be collected by the bars, and then they would pay for the additional police patrol. Under Mayor Minor's administration, it was at that time communicated that it was, I guess, not legal in the way that the funds had been being provided, that the city was going to be taking on the cost of that detail. So at that time, it was when Tim Carroll was in office, the cost for that detail was starting to be absorbed by the city. So there was something that they had determined that made it something where the businesses should not be paying for this. The city was the one that should be paying for this. So then they started, taking on that detail. Last year, I believe, and Chief Buckner and Deputy Chief Cecil and Jen Tift and others were involved in some conversations with Armory Square bar owners where it was communicated to them that I believe due to funding constraints that the city was no longer going to be able to provide this Friday and Saturday night detail for the Armory Square Entertainment District. And this would be a cost that the businesses would need to absorb. I believe this came right when, COVID had hit the businesses. And so there was frustration from the businesses in that they were going to be asked to pay for something. I believe the cost that we had been given was around $200,000 annually. There was concern from the businesses that they can't pay for this because they've been closed. They don't have any revenue. They're not able to operate. And so at that time, the mayor had participated in meetings as well, and the police department was able to find about $60,000, I believe, to again provide the detail as needed. But then, Chief Buckner made it very clear when those dollars were gone, and we need to find a different way to pay for this. It was also communicated that this was perceived to be a special detail, and so should be handled differently in terms of payment structure, possibly similar to what Syracuse University has in place. I'm not familiar with that agreement. And so, the police detail, continued to be in place. Then the curfew went in for the bars. So again, the detail was not needed for some time. So there still is approximately, I believe, like $15,000 remaining in the account, which will be able to fund a detail at some level, through the end of June. Depending on who you talk to, there's a lot of different perspective on how this, should be handled. Is it something, where this should be, a regularly assigned detail because it's been in place. Downtown is a neighborhood, but it also is an entertainment district. And so, there's perspective that this should be funded, as a regular assigned detail versus overtime. And cost absorbed by the city, but then there's also perspective that this is a special detail only provided to the downtown area. So businesses or others should be paying the city for this. So it's really complex. There's not a straight answer, I don't believe. And so I think, we as a community have work to do in terms of, figuring out how we handle this moving forward. Because we are in a pandemic and resources are scarce. And again, this is something that we put together with our budget back in January. So obviously things have changed since then, but, collectively our board agreed that it was very important for us to be able to support businesses as they emerge from the pandemic, and downtown safety and reputation as a safe neighborhood is incredibly important. The reason the detail we understand is in place is because of not only, crowd sizes and, the late night hours, But the business owners also believe strongly, it's been communicated to them just due to gang activity, people coming in and trying to start trouble. And so again, trying to support businesses coming out of the pandemic and trying to provide a safe environment, for patrons coming in and also for the residents that live downtown, was why our board agreed to a one-time action to support, allocate funds in our budget to support the detail. So this upcoming fiscal year, so July 1st through June 2022, we were able to cobble together a series of additional resources, some through some other agreements. We were able to do some additional fundraising just due to the pandemic. So we agreed for this next year, again, to support the businesses and coming out of the pandemic, that we would enter into an agreement. But again, this is something where these are the resources that we were able to allocate. It's not something that we would typically have available as part of our budget. And also, I think, again, like collectively looking at the faces on the screen, and our businesses, we need to figure out what's the right approach for Syracuse in terms of how we handle this. Because I know we all agree how important the safety of our whole community is.
Now, America, you said before this agreement went in, and thank you, by the way, for that explanation. Before this agreement went in, you said the Bar Association used to pay for this before the prior administration step in and say, let's the city take on the cost, right? Is that true that the Bar Association was able to pay for this?
That was my understanding. Yes. And so, I mean, Armory Square Association used to do a lot of, just different events and things like that. How I recall it being communicated was that it was, at the time, and I don't know what legislation or what, information that they were reviewing, but that it was actually not appropriate how this was being funded. That was something that the city would have to take on the cost of. I don't know what that piece was. I just remember being at the meeting when Tim Carroll had communicated that to the bars.
So if there was a determination that the city was supposed to take on the cost, how did we find our way back into charging you guys and asking you guys to pay? Is there anyone to answer that?
Yeah, so Councilor Majoke, this is Jen Tipton and NBD, and certainly if anyone from the police department wants to chime in if I misstate this, but I think as America tried to explain, unfortunately, this detail kind of got caught up in COVID-19. So, it was around April, May of last year when the city realized, right, like everyone else in this, world, that, the pandemic was going to impact all of us for a very long time to come. And I believe, the council passed an amended budget for the city for this current fiscal year that we're in now. And that had implications on the police budget. So, because this was, as Deputy Chief Cecil mentioned, an overtime funded detail, because of the staff constraints at the police department, they made the decision that overtime funded details were going to get cut because they had to make cuts to the overall budget. And so that's really the unfortunate, I think, part about what happened coming out of that decision. Because of course, at the same time, the city's making hard choices about things we need to cut from our budget because of the pandemic. The bars and restaurants are also being forced to make tough choices and close down and things like that. So the timing was just sort of the perfect storm where the city decided, unfortunately, we needed to cut this particular detail at exactly the time that the bars and restaurants, were being forced to close, and then they were allowed to eventually reopen, and we were then telling them there's no money for this detail. So that kind of put us, I think, as a city in the position where we needed to figure out a workaround. And I think America did a nice job of explaining how, we worked pretty collaboratively with the businesses, with the police department, with the downtown committee, had a series of conversations, and ultimately the police were able to figure out a way to fund, basically like a partial detail, because of course at the time the pandemic was still going pretty strong. There were curfews in place. A lot of bars and restaurants really weren't open for much of last summer, which will be certainly different this year, right? Because now there's no more curfew and a lot of those establishments are open again. So I think we were fortunate, because we were able to kind of downsize that detail because there wasn't as much activity going on downtown last year, and that saved some budget. So that kind of brings us to obviously this fiscal year's budget, where we needed to figure out how to make that happen. And fortunately, the downtown committee has some one-time resources that are available for us this fiscal year. So I think we have kind of a temporary solution for this coming fiscal year if council agrees. But I think the question will reappear for this committee for the next fiscal year. What do we do long term? So we sort of have a solution that gets us through June of 2022 if council agrees to go into this agreement with the downtown committee. It doesn't solve the problem long term, though. We still, as a city, need to figure out how do we budget for or fund this this detail.
Yes, and yes, for me, this raised a lot of questions for me, because when I look at this contract, there's a lot of discrepancies that I see, right? Because when you look at downtown, it's the same business district as Marshall Square Mall, right? Area. That's the same, and the size wise they may be different, but they are BIDs, right? That's yes, right? So what is so different about downtown compared to that, for them having to pay something like this? Now here's my question. So that's just a rhetorical question for everybody to think about. Now here's my question. I understand that these details were pulled years ago because the payment process was not appropriate. And I'm trying to figure out what made this process so appropriate that it's different from the way it was done.
I think one of the things is we have to do some research to find out how that determination was made back by Tim Carroll and the minor administration. So we have a little research to do. I don't see the keeper of all things historical, Joe Barry, here on the call, but we need some history. We have to do some backtracking to find out how that determination was made, Councilman Joe. I can't answer that question.
So I actually don't think I have the answer. I think Joe Barry's the right person for that. But I think also I'm able to infer, a little bit here that it might be the difference between, what's a regular detail versus what's a special detail, right? Because that's what allows SU to, come in with their contribution type agreement to have the, the police at the SU games and things like that, versus what might have been happening down here. And there might have been the determination that because it's a neighborhood, that it was should have just been regular, versus an entertainment district, which might have lent itself to being a special detail. At least that's what I would assume based on what I'm hearing from everyone.
Okay, yes, I would really like to know that historical background, Deputy Mayor. And I guess a follow-up question for me on that is, with the Syracuse University detail, are we using the same method here, where we are playing a match kind of fun game with them, or is it different?
Deputy Chief Cecil, that's part of the agreement we have with Syracuse University, correct?
Yeah, if you're talking about the dome, they pay for everything.
The agreements are not consistent. They're different based on the agreement.
Okay.
But the point is that there is an agreement for Syracuse University.
There is an agreement with Syracuse University. It's not necessarily the same terms rate as what the downtown committee gets.
And does
Right,
the dome,
right.
and I guess I think, again, one of the other items that came up, during the conversations was, like it's, the downtown streets are public space. And so that's another question. So it's, in each of the individual establishments has their own, security, personnel in place, but it's sort of like what happens in the public spaces in the streets. And so I think that's like it, maybe why it's not such an apples to apples comparison in terms of when people are, if we're talking about inside the dome, like that's a venue that people are getting invited into, that's like a private venue. But we're talking again, I believe more, about management of people in the streets, in the public spaces, in the public realm. Is not tied to a specific business. And so that's just sort of like another level of the complexity of the whole conversation of, what is the right approach for this?
So I guess thank you for that, America. So I guess for Chief Cecil, does that mean that with it being public, does that require us to ask downtown to pay for extra without taking it on as a city? Is it because it's a public space that allow us to ask for them to come up with extra money than if the city was to? I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get the logic. That's more than anything.
I understand. I think that's more of a question for the deputy mayor than me. We just know we have to put the detail there, and things were worked out behind the scenes to pay for half of it. But as far as whether or not it's justified, I think some of what America said makes a lot of sense. It's not just businesses over there; it's streets that we're providing safety for. So it's definitely much different than a dome event, no doubt about it.
And residents,
Yes.
Armory Square residents and other area residents.
I think, Councilman Joe, we clearly, I think, whether we totally agree on what's happening this year, we definitely agree that this is one time that we need to identify a methodology for the coming year. So I definitely don't think, I think from, hopefully from council approval on, we'll be working on this steadily to identify how we move forward with this responsibility, starting with the historic perspective of how we move from one thing to the other, which I don't think anyone other than maybe Joe Cecil was here during that time.
And I'm asking that because Deputy Mayor and Chief Cecil, for me, and maybe the argument of private versus public may come into play here. But I remember about 2 months ago, we had to deal with the situation at Skyline Apartment, and they had to come up with everything in terms of payment, and it just for me, the question of consistency for me here in how we treat community businesses and community organization, especially nonprofit. I think for me, it's I'm having trouble with.
Are you saying that you want everybody to have the same exact methodology for payment, Syracuse University, Green National, and the downtown committee? Because right now they don't, because they're all different. So we treat them differently. So there's like
Right.
kind of like downtown committee has slightly, I would say, like a friendlier version, because they're not really, I don't know, I guess it's kind of like toward the middle ground of whereas Green National, yeah, I think everybody says throw every cost associated with it, because we're only going in there because there's been sort of like a failure that we shouldn't be responsible for. Whereas we are responsible for the downtown streets. And then SU is like basically pays most of the costs as well, because they're big sporting events. But
Yes, that's my question is driven by uniformity, Director Rudd.
well, I think there could be an answer that the historic thing is that we haven't applied a uniform lens, and that we don't necessarily think we have to.
And my question, and exactly, and that become our question: why not?
But I don't think that there can be blanket uniformity. And I think that is the task ahead of us, quite frankly, Counselor, is to identify where that variance lies and how we approach it. But once we identify it, use it consistently.
Right.
And I also think it's important to note that, while, I get the private public distinction, but, I think one of the biggest functions of this details is when the private aspect of that entertainment that's going on down there is over, right? Once those things are closed, everybody floods out into the streets and are congregating, and they're all there. And a large part of what those officers are doing is moving everybody along and making sure everybody's getting home safe, breaking up fights, right? Getting the cars out of the parking lots, right? It stops being the bar's concerns once they're closed.
Right. Okay, you got another question, Councilor White, before I?
Oh, no, not on that subject. I'm good.
Okay.
Councilor Majuk. Thank
Okay. Now with which bring me to the next question, Chief Cecil. How did we determine that 8 officers and 10 I mean 8 officers and 2 sergeants was the right amount?
Sure. So that was based on years ago when we first started that detail. It just seemed what was manageable. As Councilor White mentioned, it's a very large area, and when the bars let out, we had 2 officers at one intersection, 2 officers at another. We determined that we needed some rovers to make sure people were moving out of the area and everybody was safe and not getting into fights. Keep in mind, we were not only blocking off streets, but we needed rovers as well. So it was based on a bunch of different things, and the determination was
Chief Cecil,
8 officers
can
and
you
2
just,
sergeants.
so I'm sorry, can you just clarify too, just so everyone has the same understanding? This is the same detail, the same group of officers that do go down to Hanover Square as well. So they're not just covering Armory, was my understanding. Is that still true?
We did start recently, yes, and that was fairly recent. When I say recent, within the last couple of years, we started to
Yeah.
have issues over at Hanover Square. So that's a good point.
Yep.
We started using them for Hanover as well.
Yeah, we did have a couple of unfortunately very violent interactions in Hanover Square last summer. So I think we just need to be mindful of that.
So we wrote, and working with the police department on the language, and Joe Barry obviously as well. When we wrote the agreement that's in front of the council, we knew Armory Square was always sort of the major activity and major focus of the patrol. Last year was the first year, I believe, that Hanover Square had received patrol, but they had a lot of issues that they were facing. So when we wrote the agreement, it's, Armory Square and other neighborhoods as mutually agreed upon between the downtown committee and the city, just to allow us the flexibility to be able to address, like, if things pop up in Hanover Square, or if things pop up, the southern end of downtown around the hotel. I think that was something that our board felt very strongly about, and just in terms of allowing that flexibility, but again, working in partnership with the police department to identify these concerning areas. And then, I think again, like with the last year with weekends on Walton, right, the city had closed Walton Street at the intersection, so there were barricades there instead, which was a much more attractive way to block. So, I think maybe that's an opportunity to possibly, in terms of the patrol size, because again, cars cannot come in or out of that area. So it's no longer like sort of not maybe as much of the traffic direction, but I obviously defer to the police department on that. But that'll be a new item. Again, if that street is closed, it's closed already all day Friday, all day Saturday, and opens again on Sunday. So that helps to eliminate some of the vehicular traffic concerns.
And Chief Cecil, so this 10 number, and I'm still trying to figure out the data behind it, that couldn't we do with less? Can we do with less? Say, and that has been my question from the beginning, that having 8 officers and two sergeants, right? That's what you said, 2 sergeants, which is 10 total, 10 total. I have made a proposal that it be cut down to 6. Okay. And that's with not having a data in front of us that gave you that a 10 was the right amount. I considering that this is an overtime that the city spent. For me, I have an issue trying to put 10 officers down there.
Councilman Majuk, for us, the 10 officers is that at some point, looking at what we're responsible for, totality of the circumstances to which we're dealing with, large crowd, many of which who are intoxicated, some of which that involve rival folks that are in a common area. More often than not, we get out of there with a few arrests for people who are being disorderly or public intoxication, and then we have our fights. When we have our fights and our skirmishes, it's usually a brawl. It's not really just a fight. And under those circumstances, the 10 officers that are there on that scene are screaming for help. for other officers that are working the road that now have to come into that location to be able to help them bring that all under control. So for us, it's an officer safety issue. When you look at all of those bars letting out, you're probably talking about maybe a few hundred people in the general area. And if you just look at that, just at sheer numbers of the number of people that we have in a small contained area, and only 10 police officers there and 2 supervisors. And by the way, that's based largely to do with our what's called span of control. When you have a supervisor, you want to have no more than, under the best of circumstances, 5 to 7 people that you have direct reporting to those individuals. So when you look at 10, that's why we have the 8 and the 2 sergeants for that span of control, to make sure that if we're doing something over here down the block, that we can be able to have a supervisor and officers deal with that issue, while simultaneously we may be dealing with other things that are going on. So that's just based upon what we think is what we can safely do the circumstances, with the understanding that there are times when we exceed their capacity to be able to manage what we have.
Deputy Chief Cecil, might you be able to give some context? Because I know when I used to get up or be out till that hour, I would see the officers, walking. So they don't just position on Walton Street. Can you explain just sort of the general blocks or geography that they do cover as part of their walking beat?
Oh, sure. So America, as you know, they cover everything down there. They are very rarely just standing on a corner. They move up and down the blocks. They are spread out throughout the Armory Square area. And as Tiff mentioned, they're now going over to Armory Square as well. We have some, again, you will see them sometimes posted in the area where the streets are being blocked, but very rare do they just stand on a corner. They move up and down the street, usually in pairs, because that's an officer safety issue, as the chief mentioned. There are hundreds of people down there on a Friday, Saturday night, and they're moving around, engaging with people, doing a lot more proactive stuff than a lot of people probably know, to try to make sure when the bars let out, there's a massive presence, and consequently we don't have a lot of fights, or as many as we would, as many problems as we would, if there wasn't this police presence, and this police presence that everybody knows is going to be there when they get out of the bars. So I don't know if I've answered that, America, but
yeah, I think, again, just because oftentimes I think when people think of Armory Square, they just think of primarily Walton Street. But I know, again, there's bars and also front Fayette Street and Franklin Street, so it's not only the 100 block of Walton Street, probably 200 block now as well, with weekends on Walton, but then Franklin Street, and then around Fayette Street and down Clinton Street and around through Jefferson Street, just because we do have, high concentration of institutions around those different areas. And so we know how much the businesses appreciate the patrol, particularly when they're out and walking and doing those constant loops and being seen in those 7 or 8 different blocks of bar activity, just because, again, it's that known presence, which if you're smart, you're going to go someplace else to cause trouble, and hopefully not have that happen downtown.
I'll just add real quickly that what Chief Buckner has talked about, operationally about span of control, which is a new term I just learned. But also, we've had a whole population of people who have been sequestered for COVID. All of the restrictions are being let loose, and people are ready to get together again and get downtown and get out and be amongst each other. The new element of cutting off what we did last year on Walton may change the effect of what's going on downtown, but we don't know. We don't have that historical data, because the numbers are just not going to be the same as they were during 2020. They're going to, I anticipate, and I think I am right, that people are going to come back downtown and do what we do in Syracuse in the summer, and that's get together and have a good time downtown. And so there may be a slight dynamic change now that we're going to continue what we did last year on Walton Street and extend the activity onto the street. It may mean more police presence, or it may not. But I think to get in there and I think we need to base it on our historic knowledge prior to COVID.
Lastly, Councilman Majoke and everyone else, keep in mind, this is a voluntary detail. If the officers feel that the detail is all of a sudden not become adequately staffed, they're not going to sign up for it.
Now, is it my understanding that, Chief, part of when you assign regular patrol shift officers around, is it correct to say that the downtown area as well get officers assigned to it?
There is a downtown beat, if the territory, for lack of a better phrase, that has an officer in it, but that territory includes Armory Square, but most of the residential components of that are handled by the officer or officers working in that area, because they don't have to go into Armory and Hanover, because the officers on that detail will take the calls that are coming out of those two concentrated footprints. So that officer that's assigned to that territory didn't have to go there.
So those officers, considering that is there late at night, and when we talk about residential, considering that there's not a much footprint going beyond the Fayette and Salina, going back to Armory Square, that there's not a lot of footprint, so that we could utilize that same officers to supplement Armory Square.
Oh, no, there's another, help me, SPD, another pretty active bar north of, where am I? Genesee Street, just north of the skating rink. A lot of people go there.
Mm-hmm.
Not that we're getting a lot of trouble out of Dinosaur Barbecue, but that's a crowd that's there too. So there is some activity north of Clinton Square.
And then the bulk of
Studio 54, you're thinking of, Deputy Mayor. Studio 54.
Thank you.
The bar.
and that shift is
And
our
another,
mid-shift.
and there's another one off of Clinton. There's two of them up there.
Well, and
Joe,
there's
you
the
don't know
new
too
sports.
familiar for me. You
There's
said
the
that
new
too quick
sports
for
bar
me,
too.
Joe.
Yeah, there's that new sports bar too at the apartment complex, which is actually, I think, really popular over
Press room pub.
Press Room Pub. Thank you, America. That's right. Yeah, there's now 3 or 4 places up there. And then actually there's a few places just kind of west of Armory Square proper as well. So the area, to your point, Councilor Majoke, is sort of expanding. It's radiating beyond
Which is great.
Armory Square and Hanover Square, but Armory and Hanover certainly have the deepest concentration of businesses.
So the point is to zero in on the problem of overtime, Chief. And every dollar matter. Every dollar matter, and it is clear that we have that problem. And to continue to seem like we're not paying attention to it, I have a problem with that, Chief.
Councilman Joke, did Chief Buckner and SPD, and I don't know if the budget director is still on here, but since Chief has been here, that's been his #1 task, is to rein in overtime. And he has absolutely done a yeoman's job in making sure that every overtime opportunity that we use is because we need it. And that number did decrease over the last year, given that, but even the year before that. So that was one of his #1 tasks when he was brought on board.
And Deputy Mayor, I'm not disputing that the chief has been doing great for us. I'm not disputing that. Beyond overtime, he has been doing other amazing stuff, right? But overtime, whether it's off by a dollar, it's still overtime, right? It's still an overtime, and we are in millions, right? We spend quite a bit, right, on overtime, and that for us as a city is a serious issue. It's a serious issue.
We agree. We agree. And,
Right.
and we balance the fiscal responsibility that we all bear the burden for with the needs of the public safety, particularly in our districts that our neighborhoods and our districts that generate our hub of entertainment, our university area, those special details, the major issue that we're having with some of our high-rise apartments. We have to balance the need of that public safety with the budget, and they are equally important.
Now with that, I'm gonna leave this meeting knowing that this contract is coming back next year, right?
Yep.
Next fiscal year. And I'm expecting that by the time we have this conversation next year, that we have our ducks in a row, that we have some kind of a strategy moving forward, not this one, right?
Oh, you'll be part of conversations way before we come back to this moment in time. We're not gonna wait
This-
till this moment in time.
Just to clarify, for the agreement that's in front of the council, our board had agreed to the one-time action. So this was not something we had envisioned on an annual basis.
No, that's understood.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay.
And I
Councilman, any other-
also want to put
Yes,
in the
go ahead.
universe that I do not expect our staffing issues to be remedied by this time next year with a new budget. If anything, it would have gotten significantly worse.
All a part of the strategy and us figuring out what we need to do, Chief. Taking that into consideration, absolutely. Not going into it blindly about your staffing issues.
Any other
Councilman
questions?
Majok, you mind if I make, yeah, you mind if I make a quick comment? So I think I'm probably in Armory Square at 2 a.m. more so than anybody else on this call. I work in bars, usually until closing or past. I have seen 20, 30 person brawls breaking out and seen what is needed when we do that. So I definitely I understand the need. I would say to both the chiefs, Cecil and Buckner, the thing that I heard a lot, and again, I don't have data on this, this is anecdotally what I've heard from bar owners, is that they feel often they see, 6 to 8 officers congregating and standing around for, 15, 20-minute intervals. I'm not gonna say that that's what happens, because I don't sit there for 45 minutes and watch what officers are doing the whole time. But this is the report that we get from many bar owners, that there seems to be congregating and standing around. And again, not saying that that's the case, but I would say one way to perhaps reduce any opposition or complications with this kind of initiative is to further encourage officers to increase the beat walking, doing a couple of laps of different blocks to make sure that, the bulk of the time they are, you mentioned that you are, that this is something you guys are already working on and focusing on, is trying to make sure that they are not just congregating, that they're walking different areas of downtown. But I would say that's what we heard anecdotally back from bar owners. So I would say if that's something you guys could relay to whoever is working point on those weekend nights, that encourage the officers to more frequently, go do a lap of Franklin, go do a lap of the areas north, go do a lap by 54, and maybe pop into some of these bars more frequently, just to make presence felt and kind of reduce, again, seeing the officers. I've done it so many times when people have been congregating at 2:05 or whatever outside of a bar, spinning those lights. It's like when the lights go on, people just clear out, and so seeing officers increases safety tremendously in these situations where people are intoxicated and looking to continue the party. So I just wanted to relay that on behalf of what I'm anecdotally hearing from bar owners, that if we could focus more on whoever's working point down there to say, continue to run laps, don't congregate out here with 6 to 8 officers, because as soon as the bar owners see that, they're like, why are we paying for this if these guys are just standing around kind of attitude? And I get it because, you know, I've worked in many jobs, like when I worked in as a PA on film sets. You basically stand there for 6 hours until they need something done. And you stand there because of when the brawls break out, you want to have 10 officers ready to go. So I get the, you know, the both perspectives of it as well. I think it's a complicated one, but I would say, yeah, just to relay that if we could keep the officers circulating and popping into different spots and making their presence felt and focus on that a little bit more, I think you'd get more response from the bar owners that they need this patrol and that they want it down there, and get more, you know, vocal support for the SPD's initiative here. Because I do think, as I said, after seeing brawls break out frequently at 2 a.m., I know that we need a lot of officers down there, but I think to remove any negative connotation to keep them circulating. Sorry if that was long-winded, but just wanted to relay that.
Councilman Driscoll, we will certainly take care of that with our supervisors that are down there. But, you know, also in addition to that, you know, for everyone to, you know, let's all consider too that this is kind of being done on a voluntary basis, and there are other options. So if the downtown committee wanted to maybe move in the direction of private security, you know, we need to consider everything.
Yeah, I think, and again, I'm looking forward to, you know, having more conversations around this. But again, we feel, just again, like from what we've observed that happens in the public spaces, that this is not something that's appropriate for a private security firm. I think again, like it's the public spaces and the issues that we've seen, we hear about in the news. We're, you know, obviously very fortunate and thankful to have the police in place to be able to address these, because no one else can.
Any other questions? So I think for me, Chief and Deputy Mayor and Deputy Chief Cecil, I hope you understand the point that we are trying to make here. That this is a serious matter that we want to definitely pay attention to. I want to move this forward, with the hope that next year we have some remedy around it, right? I don't know, Councilor White, Councilor Driscoll, any thought moving this on?
I'm definitely game to move it forward myself. I'd be in favor of that.
Councilor White, you're muted.
You're muted, boy.
I thought I pressed unmute. No, I'm in support of moving this item. I do think that at some point, you know, we should probably see about the staffing issues of whether or not it could be regular duty versus an overtime detail. But I echo Councilman Driscoll's point there that this detail is sorely needed to protect the patrons that are enjoying our downtown activities.
Yes, and that's correct. And the fact that downtown borders 3 districts, and all those districts have assignments, assign officers to them. It's, for me, I think as we move forward, Chief Cecil, Chief Buckner, I think it's those details. I recommend that you go revisit those details again, and I think there could be a room that this number of officers could be reduced, and for that I'll ask for a motion to move it forward. Second. Any second?
I'd second that.
Okay.
Second, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. America, we appreciate you coming here and being part of this meeting. Deputy Mayor, Chief Cecil, Chief Buckner, everyone, thank you so much. If nothing, do you have anything else, Chief Cecil, Chief Buckner?
Do you have anything from fire on the agenda?
Yes, we did. We finished it first. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's fine. Anything?
So thank you.
Okay. Well, that will do it for us today. Have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks for calling us, Councilor Majok. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.